Oh, hey.
Can you tell me, this poor idiotic comedian that I am, can you tell me the relationship between Yahweh and El?
Yes. So,
Thank you,
and it's
Andy.
one of those things that kind of depends on the century. Originally, El and Yahweh might not have even been from the same pantheon, like
Right.
entirely separate pantheons. El being further north, and Yahweh being part of little nomadic tribes further down south around like Midian and Edom. And eventually Yahweh kind of got adopted into the Canaanite pantheon. I guess he was like an orphan, and so they just brought him in, they gave him a home. And when that happened, he became one of the favorite sons of El. You could think of El as sort of like Zeus. He's like this great, top tier god. And he had a whole bunch of sons. He had like 70 sons. And each son is set to rule over a different nation. And one of them was Yahweh. Is after he gets adopted into it. And that's operating on the idea that he was adopted into it and that Yahweh isn't just another name for an honorific title, meaning Lord, the way that Baal is.
Right.
Which it also seems to do that as well. I think it's sort of both. It started as a separate entity, and then it got adopted into their pantheon, and it's sort of gotten merged with Baal, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, El was, by this point, once they're all in one pantheon, whenever that happened, El became Yahweh's dad. And you actually see a direct reference to this in Deuteronomy 32:8. El is dividing the nations of the world up among his 70 sons. And Israel, his favorite country, he gives to his favorite son, Yahweh. And depending on what version of the Bible you're reading, they may have completely changed the wording of that passage so that it doesn't look like Yahweh has a dad. It's like, oh, and El is giving away, he's dividing up the nations of the world, and he chose Israel as his own inheritance, or something like that. Like I said, there's like 1,000 different versions of it, but in our oldest versions, it's clearly polytheistic. Yahweh had a dad. His dad was named El Elyon, the God Most High. And so Yahweh was a lesser god. He was a son.
I'm sorry. His name was El Elyon?
Yeah, El, and then the second part is Elyon. And El simply means God. You could actually have different gods that have that title. It just means a god. And then Elyon, Elyon, means Most High. And so El Elyon means the God Most High, or the Most High God. Another example would be El Shaddai, which basically means like the mountains or the twin mountains or the hills. And so that would be the God of the mountains. So that's how that works.
Yeah, this is something that has been fascinating me now here recently, as I've learned that ancient Jews had a pantheon and were more polytheistic. Where does Elohim fall into all of it? Like, is that the father of Yahweh? Is that who you're speaking of, Elohim?
Elohim is complex. Elohim, the word Elohim can have multiple meanings, and you kind of have to look at the context of each passage to figure out what you're talking about. So it can be a reference to a generic god. You could just, if you're talking about a god and, the people are supposed to understand which one you're talking about, sort of like using a pronoun, like if I'm talking about Chris and I keep saying him, then if I'm saying him, then okay, it's understood I'm talking about Chris. And so Elohim can be a generic term for God. It can also be used to mean a bunch of gods, a whole group. It can be a plural. And so you see this, I believe, in Genesis 3. Adam and Eve, they get kicked out of the garden, and Yahweh says, imagine if they had gotten their hands on the fruit of the tree of life, then they would be like us, like the Elohim, with knowledge and eternal life. And so it's at that point, he's talking about the pantheon, El Elyon himself, all of the other children. And so It can mean that as well. So it's sort of a fluid term. It has multiple meanings, and you kind of have to look at the context.
So it's literally a recognition within the Bible itself that God isn't monotheistic, that there are other gods. And
absolutely,
it's fascinating because, I get attacked for my interpretation of that Genesis chapter that you just talked about, but we have the same exact interpretation. To me, they took of the fruit of knowledge, and then God expelled them and clearly said if they were to eat of the fruit of life, then they would become gods like he was. So, and Christians rail at me for that interpretation. I'm like, that's what the Bible clearly says.
Yeah. And it's not just your interpretation. I mean, this is scholarly consensus, what you're talking about here, especially because it says they would become like us, and it uses a plural pronoun. Us. It's not saying, oh, they would become like me. It does not say that. It says like us. And even in the other creation story in Genesis 1, it says that because Genesis 1 is about El, and Genesis 2 and 3 is about Yahweh. Two different stories. But in Genesis 1, it says that in the image of the gods, of the Elohim, he created them. Male and female created he them. So it's saying that El created the human race, male and female, to be like the male and female Elohim, the male and female gods. And this has been examined every different way, and so many scholars have tried to find ways around that passage. But it's clear what it says, and the amount of I guess apologetic acrobatics they have to do to try to make it not say, or to try to say that there could be some ambiguity, and it might not be saying that there are male and female gods. It kind of shows, that they don't really have good footing for that, and they can't even if they could, they still are admitting that it is talking about a pantheon, about multiple gods, because it clearly says that it is, and they don't even try to deny that anymore.
That's intriguing and very interesting, because like I bring that up, and Christians just go insane, like they can't stand it, and to hear that it's like scholarly consensus now is kind of refreshing.